Hello and welcome to Superpower Broadcasting. I'm Kevin Castley. Thank you for being with us tonight. Today marks the 75th anniversary of the conclusion of World War II in Europe, with the victory of the Allies and the defeat of fascism on the continent. We saw a death toll in World War II altogether approaching 90 million. It was an absolute disaster by all measures. And what we talk about in this channel all the time is how preemptive, proactive, direct action in the in the run up can ultimately reduce the greater casualties in the long run. And that World War II really demonstrated that, when we talk about war, and when we talk about the inevitability of war, World War II really illustrated what can happen if you wait and you just wait until you're forced into a war, as opposed to getting it over with in the short run relatively easily. Adolf Hitler, of course, was a menace, and it was clear he was a menace before he invaded Poland in 1939, before the war, as it became known as World War II, really began. Hitler had been taking territory in the Rhineland, in the Sudetenland. There was the Anschluss. There were many signs that he was intent on expanding his empire, and of course, inevitably, he went into Poland, and then that was the straw that broke the camel's back. And instead of taking out Hitler in an early phase, which might have resulted in a few million casualties, things were allowed to fester. Neville Chamberlain, he said he delivered peace, and all he delivered was procrastination. And we saw that by waiting a few years. Not only did you have to do the war anyway, but now tens of millions died instead of a few million. And victory was nowhere near as guaranteed in World War II as it would have been had it, say, taken place in 1937 or whatnot. And of course, it was very clear that the Soviets and the Nazis were essentially partners throughout the course of that. And what you're going to see right now, and I'll have a stream out tomorrow on May 9th talking about the Russian narrative around World War II, because of course, Victory Day in Europe, which we're commemorating today on this stream, is May 8th in the Western Allied powers. But of course, due to the time zone difference, when victory was officially declared, it was past midnight in Moscow. And so Russia celebrates Victory Day on May 9th. And so tomorrow there will be a massive parade on Red Square. Putin will bring out all of his nuclear weapons, his delivery systems, his tanks. Some of them might break down, as has been known to happen in the past. We'll have all that kind of stuff. And we'll have this narrative out there, of course, that the world owes the Soviet Union this great debt of thanks, because the Soviet Union did most of the work or whatnot in terms of fighting Hitler. But it should be noted that the Soviet Union was the only party in the Allies, at least the big three, the UK, the US, and the Soviet Union, that was actively working and cooperating with the Nazis. You can look up the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, in which Hitler, as well as Stalin, agreed to basically do each other's dirty work, share the profits of plundering, purging, and splurging their nation, essentially for their own prestige and consolidation of power. And then, of course, Hitler got greedy and invaded the Soviet Union, and now we're given this narrative that, oh, well, the Russians, they did a great thing. Stalin did a great thing by defeating Hitler. And it's like, well, yeah, but that's kind of like buying into Trotsky's line about how he was like this good guy or whatever. It's like, yeah, that's because he didn't get power. If he got power, things would have gone really differently. And so the Soviet Union, to say that they're a hero or whatnot, it's like, yeah, but you guys were working with Hitler, and you would have worked with Hitler for a long time, but he backstabbed you. It's like, you don't get brownie points for being a hero when you were working with a very evil villain, and then the villain backstabbed you. It's like, okay. But that will be a topic for tomorrow's stream. What I wanted to talk about, especially on this stream here, and we've got a panel lined up tonight. We've got Suzuki, we've got Arthur, and we've got Anthony Roberto with us. What I wanted to talk about was how, when it comes to war, when it comes to these big consequential decisions, that there is no choice between peace and war when you have a world that's divided between the free and the enslaved, right? I mean, World War II was inevitable. Neville Chamberlain didn't have a choice to offer the British people. There was only going to be war inevitably. I mean, it was either going to be war over Poland, or was going to be war when he came for the United Kingdom itself. And so, likewise, you can look at it the other way. You could have done the war much earlier than Poland and averted the global catastrophe that wound up happening. And so, we're going to open it up to the panel tonight. But I just got to say, this is relevant for a number of reasons, because we're in a world right now in which there are actors as villainous as Hitler was. Sure, they haven't killed as many people, but that's not for lack of trying. That's largely because they don't have the means to kill as many people as he did. We have Assad, we have Kim, we've got Putin, we've got Xi, and we have people on Twitter saying that, oh, it's an offense, it's an insult to the victims of the Holocaust to compare Assad to Hitler. And it's like, no, it's not. Assad is to us what Hitler was to the people at the time that of the 1930s and 40s. And so you'll see this line, this narrative that's offered, that the anti-interventionists will claim, well, I'm not 100% anti-interventionist. If you ask them to basically name a justified war, they'll all say World War II was justified. Every single one of them. They'll all say, it was a good thing that the West went in and took out Hitler, but no war since then has been justified. That's usually their line of reasoning. And they'll often cite things such as the Holocaust to say, well, that was the one time America acted as the good sort of party, except completely missing the chronology of what happened, completely ahistorical. The fact of the matter is, nobody knew about the Holocaust when the Allied powers declared war on Hitler, or rather, when Hitler declared war on some of them, and things transpired into World War II. Nobody knew about the Holocaust at that time. In fact, a lot of the atrocities that happened in the Holocaust were only discovered when Germany was finally liberated. And so this argument, well, the Holocaust is so bad, I would have been an interventionist. It's like, you wouldn't have known about the Holocaust, these people at least. They definitely would have been saying Hitler is our friend, and why not peace? And so they're saying the same thing about Assad today, saying the same thing about Putin today, same thing about Xi Jinping today. And just as Hitler went into the Rhineland and the Sudetenland and so on, Xi Jinping in particular is going into the South China Sea, putting 1.5 million Uyghurs into gulags, and his buddy Putin has literally invaded Europe and taken the Crimean Peninsula for Russia. And so this is, people say that history repeats itself and whatnot. And it's like, well, no, these things happen. I'm not saying that it's going to be like World War II necessarily, but there's a very good point to be made here that you should get tough on these enemies before they get to the level that Hitler was able to get to, where they can do even more damage. And North Korea is a great example of that. But with all that being said, that was a bit of a longer intro, but we're going to open up to the panel here. How are you guys all doing tonight? We'll start with Suzuki.
I'm doing great. And actually, this day has a lot of significance with regards to my family. I lost 6 relatives to the Nazis, and several of them were actually fighting against them. They weren't just civilians. Many other of my relatives lived under Nazi rule, like my grandmother, who's still alive. She grew up in Germany when it was under the control of the Nazis, and she lost several friends because they dared to speak out against Hitler, and they were rounded up and sent off to who knows where. And on the other side of my family, I'm half Greek. I had relatives who served in the Greek army, and they fought against Hitler in 1941 when Greece was invaded. And one of them was killed in action. The other one was a general. He actually fought so valiantly, the Germans spared his life and released him. And the worst case was my great uncle. He was 16 at the time and living in Greece, and the villagers and the people who lived in his village were harboring partisans. And when the Nazis found out, they punished the village by taking every adult over the age of 16 and shooting them by a lake. And my great uncle was orphaned and had to take care of his younger sister at the age of 16 for 3 years before Greece was finally liberated. And then he moved to the United States, actually started a very successful liquor store business, and he died about 2 years ago. But he died, surrounded by his family, and he died a very successful man.
Yeah.
And I think it's such a testament to human resilience that you could lose everything so early in your life and yet still live such a fulfilled, full life.
Right. Yeah, I mean that kind of goes into the tragedy of what happened, is that, even for the survivors, the Nazis stole, family experiences that they would never have, that sort of thing. And as far as the resilience goes, I mean, that's the ultimate triumph over the enemy, right? Is to live the good life in that sense, right? And to do your best to basically, be successful and everything. And when we look at what, of course, unfolded in the events after World War II, we had the creation of the State of Israel, and there are, when we talk about the rumblings of the era that preceded World War II, there are a lot of similarities that we're living through right now. I talked about how Putin's gone into Crimea, invaded Europe. Talked about how Xi Jinping has basically rounded up 1.5 million people and put them in concentration camps. Again, these are things that people didn't even know about with Hitler. They knew he took the Sudetenland and stuff, but they didn't know about the Holocaust, right? And they still supported the war. The thing is, there's more evidence now. We have more information now, and we still have people who say, well, no, that's not our business. And so it proves to me that these people wouldn't have done anything if they had been in power back then. That they're lying. Yeah.
So not only that, but there's also parallels in the response after we learned about the war crimes. After the Holocaust, you had a group of, you had the emergence of Holocaust deniers, who were saying, oh, the Holocaust was a hoax, to create Israel. And you see that again today with people saying, oh, the chemical attacks in Syria were a hoax to justify more endless war for oil or, whatever shit to come up with.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, is that these people, I talk about like the run up to World War II. One of the big similarities that we have is the resurgence of the isolationists in society. Back then, right before World War II, you had a lot of people that called themselves like America First, and they had posters of, why not peace? Hitler is our friend, all that sort of stuff. The exact same thing that like Tanky Tulsi Gabbard supporters are saying, for example, about Assad, or that a lot of the trad cons and ultra conservative people and alt-righters are saying about Putin. Or you got a lot of communists saying, Xi Jinping is our friend. Like, we got a lot of radicals right now. And that's the thing, is that they all basically buy into that narrative that peace is even an option. And of course, they're essentially fifth columns. They're just as much fifth columns as they were back then. But for all these people, if you grilled them on it, they would all most likely say, well, yeah, I would have supported World War II because Hitler was evil. And it's like, no, that's a cute line. They know that World War II is such a powerful thing in memory They know that Hitler is just, Hitler's almost like the definition of evil in our culture, that for them to say otherwise they know that they can't say that, so they have to pretend like they were for getting into World War II. They wouldn't have been, and they're not now. They're not for dealing with anything quickly. They're not for getting proactive. They're for letting these things fester until we have to fight the war anyway. And now we're in a position much weaker than we would have been had we gotten onto it much earlier. And so that's kind of one of the points that I have to say about this sort of thing here. But we'll go to Arthur for your thoughts now. Thanks for coming on.
Okay, first I want to say fuck Hitler and all the people who protested and said make peace with Hitler, and big up USA and big up, little up USSR for helping.
Oh man, see, that's the thing. There's this narrative out there that the USSR did like all the work or most of the work or whatever. It's like, no, they had most of the casualties from the Allies because the Soviet government didn't care about their lives. The Soviet war effort was greatly enabled by U.S. Lend-Lease. There was a lot of trucks that were offered, a lot of meat that was offered to the Red Army by the United States. That this is the sort of stuff that for them to talk about this as like, it's a one-up against America. It's like, yeah, but that victory for them wouldn't have been possible without American assistance. It's like America did most of the production. America did most of the actual logistical effort. That it's just it's a bogus line. It's a bogus line, and yet I went to school. I went to school with so-called educated people who think that Stalin somehow deserves credit for defeating Hitler. It's like, no, he was an evil dude who got backstabbed by another evil dude, so he went after the other evil dude. It's like, that doesn't make you a good guy. But we're going to go to Anthony Roberto now for your thoughts.
Right. So if we're talking about, World War II, I know in my family, both my mom and my dad's side fought in World War II. On my dad's side, my great grandfather, he fought in the army, and on my mom's side, 5 distant relatives fought in the Army, Air Corps, Navy, and Marines. So like really spread out throughout the different branches. And one person I believed died on the beaches of Normandy. But most of my family fought on the Pacific. Like I know my great grandfather fought on the Pacific side, so they were fighting the Japanese side, and from what I've learned, a lot of my family members on that side, whether it be the Army, Air Corps, whatever, they made a lot of sacrifices, of being there, out in the jungles or out at sea or whatever, and it really is something else, because a lot of these people, they come home shell shocked and whatnot, and I think it's good that we have at least some appreciation for people who fought in this war, because it was really something else. It was really something that no one ever imagined, at the time. And I think, if you still have relatives now that are alive that fought in this war, I think it's a good time to thank them, whether they fought the Japanese, Italians, or the Nazis, because, this was a true menace to humanity. This was really the fascism at its height, and I think it really is a disservice for all the people who downplay the conflict or downplay a role the United States has. I mean, I think actually our active service went to up to 16 million by 1945, so we had millions of people in service fighting for this, and even at home, like a lot of women, they took up jobs within factories, and and people really sacrificed everything. I know for my grandpa, when he was younger, he told me that they would ration food. People really, I mean, you thought this was bad. I mean, people really went through a lot to try to liberate the world. And I think from this problem from ever starting again, it always starts with, you have to squash it while it's small. You can't let the fire get too big. That's the thing. People like David Pacman, they think the fire, they think it's fine. But, people like Kevin Castle, they want to see it gone. They want to see it stop. They want to see it solved. You know, and I think the other thing when it comes to the Soviet Union is that we really gave them a lot. You know, when it comes, I think we gave them like 6 million tons worth of military equipment, from the Sherman tanks to, you know, Thompson, and all kinds of weapons. You know, and it's like the Soviets didn't fight themselves. It's like we fought the Nazis in Northern Africa and Western Europe. You know, like Hitler couldn't keep up a two-front war. You know,
Yeah.
and it's like we really gave a leg up for the Soviets. And it's like the thing is, and something I posted on Twitter earlier today was, Eastern Europe wasn't liberated until 1991.
That's
Eastern
right.
that's like people who think that they were liberated say no, it wasn't. Europe was not liberated until 1991, and ever since 2014, a part of Europe has not been liberated because now the Russians are back in, because they weren't really any better, you know. And I think it's important to see problems at the first sight of things and to try to solve them while they're still small, because if things get bigger, then more people might die, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I think that's one of the big takeaways from World War II is that it really proved the point that there's not a choice between war and peace. You know, there's a choice between war now or war later and a lot more debt. So,
Right. And I think the other thing when it comes to that is like we, you know, I think like we can't really conceptualize the fact that like this can happen again. This can totally
yeah.
happen again. Like, are you kidding me? Like Crimea,
Yep.
Cyprus, you know, China with the South China Sea.
Yep.
These things can happen. These things always happen. I mean, even if you might not hear about it, look it up. Look up. You know, it's like there's all these different things that are going on around the world of, you know, Russia, China. They're trying to they're trying to take up power and influence and, you know, resources and territory. And it's like we're sitting here debating on like whether if intervention is good or not. I just think it's so silly. It's like, dude, we're losing. We're on the losing end right now, I think. And I think we have to go back to winning. And like that's
Yeah.
just my opinion.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We're on the losing end, and when we allow ourselves to basically say, "Oh, well, actually, we're the bad guys," and it would be a bad thing for us to be proud of ourselves. It would be a bad thing to have a big military. Then our enemies gain ground, and then they come for us anyway. Except now we're in a position of weakness. So it's like there's no choice between peace and war. The war is going to happen sooner or later. I'd rather have the war from a position of strength earlier than a position of weakness on their terms later on. I mean, because
Ronald Reagan had a great speech about that. I don't know if you know that speech. And it's like, yeah, Ronald Reagan said, you know, if we can see now, we will have the ultimate surrender later, because that's just a reality. And I don't want to have that. We can't give up.
Yeah, no, our generation is notorious for this. Like in particular, there's this idea that, you know, we're the bad guys, so it would be a bad thing for us to assert ourselves. So let's just concede and forfeit the West, because after all, isn't the West just like white supremacy or whatever? And so thereby allowing Putin and Xi to take over Eurasia in the beginning with fascism and communism. But they'll never be satisfied with just Eurasia. Eurasia is the base from which they'll attack America. And America's not going to win that. I mean, America might be able to hold off for a few hundred years, maybe. But at the end of the day, if they can get all of Eurasia, like Hitler and Stalin were trying to do, then they'll come for America. And America, if America is no longer isolationist at that point because people woke up, it'll be too late. Like we need to be aware of that right now. It's something that everybody in NATO should be aware of, that our enemies want to see us dead, and they want our territory to be gulag puppet state. So,
right. I
mean, it's just, you know, one thing that I remember, Suzuki, you wrote a piece, and if I recall, you were referencing the the notion that the road to hell is paved with good intention. I believe you were talking about Rwanda with that, if I recall.
Yes, yes. The title of that article was "The Road to Hell," and yes, it was based off of that. It's because I feel like I'm as anti-war as anyone else. I despise war. War causes destruction, but people have to understand the difference between meaningful peace and a false peace. And if you
Hmm.
have a false peace, it only leads to a more destructive war. And that's what Neville Chamberlain failed to realize. And that's what the UN in Rwanda failed to realize. That wasn't a real peace. It wasn't a meaningful one. It demanded action. And because they didn't act, over 1 million people died, completely needless deaths.
Yeah, I mean, and see, that's the thing right there is that our our opponents will often accuse us of being misguided or true believers that we think America's fighting for freedom or whatnot. And it's like I've said on numerous occasions, I don't care even if America is going in, say, for oil. I think that's a bogus meme, but even if we're true, America is the only hegemon that has anything in common with human decency. So I'd rather them than Russia or China be the world police. And so they'll say, well, you guys just have good intentions, but you don't understand. Your idealism gets people killed. And it's like, no, but they think that they're making the world a better place. They think that they're helping people by stopping the wars or whatever, thereby letting Assad gas his own people, butcher hundreds of thousands, create 8 million plus refugees, allowing Putin to invade Europe and degrade European resolve. It goes on. And the inevitable conclusion of all of this is that it's going to be people virtue signaling about how much they hate war that are going to bring about a war in the next 30 to 50 years that's going to make World War II look like child's play. So, because they didn't have big nukes back then. So,
Yeah. Also, preaching this anti-war rhetoric when it comes to Assad. When you say that, like, Assad, forget the conspiracy theories that he didn't gas his people. There are other people who say, okay, maybe he did, but it's not our problem, and we shouldn't get involved. When you say that, you're not making Syrian civilians feel better. You're making yourself feel better. You're not helping out innocent people in Syria. You're helping out yourself. It's a really, I find isolationism to be one of the most selfish and self-righteous ideologies. And I utterly abhor it because of that. Because I think it goes against
absolutely.
everything this country. I live in the United States. Everything this country was built on was selflessness and human rights and the rights of man and how we should stand up for those rights. And I think that isolationism spits in the face of that.
Oh, for sure. And it's not even a selfishness in the sense that it's going to make the individual Americans, for example, better off, because oftentimes they'll say, well, I don't care about Syrians. I don't care about Ukrainians. I just care about Americans. And it's like, yeah, but Americans aren't going to be very well off if Russia has the world and now they're on the Canadian and Mexican border coming for you. Like, wouldn't you rather deal with the conflict over there than have it come over here? I mean, I am reminded of John Bolton's line about that, where I know a lot of people, especially on the left, freaked out, but also a lot of people on the far right freaked out about this, where they said John Bolton had this line about the Korean War, where he said, well, I'd rather have the Korean War go hot over there than have to deal with it over here. And people took that like, oh, he's a horrible warmonger. He doesn't care about South Koreans or whatever. And it's like, no, he recognizes that South Koreans are going to die either way. The question is America going to win, or is America going to be defeated by the communists in China and North Korea when they come for America? It's like, it's the sort of thing. Like,
and what's so sad that it's like he had to leave. He had to leave. And
yeah.
It's like, because it's like Republicans have always been staunchly interventionist and wanting to free the world and whatever. And it's like, in the first time, really, in a long time, John Bolton has to leave because Trump decided to have friends. He decided to have cake. He likes to have cake. He doesn't want to save the millions of lives. He thinks having chocolate cake is better. He's just
Oh
in it
yeah.
for the short term.
Oh yeah, and here's another thing about all this that is just, it angers me to no end, is when people will say, oh, look at how many people died in a certain war, like for example the Iraq War. They'll say like, oh, 1 million people died, which is nowhere near true. The actual number is closer to 200,000, and most of those were the fault of Iranian-backed insurgents. That was an American action, but let's just say 200,000 people died because of it. So Bush is going to get blamed because 200,000 people died in our universe and our timeline, when in another universe where Saddam was allowed to stay in power, he went on to invade another country just after he invaded Iran and Kuwait. He invades Israel, and like, say, I don't know, 4 million people die in that war. So, but Bush doesn't get credit for saving 3.8 million people. He just gets blamed for killing 200,000. Like, people miss out the fact that getting the war over with very early on saved all those people from having to live and die under him. Because even if he didn't do a war, just him being in power killed about 1.5 million people. And so over 30 years. So if Bush hadn't done anything, and let's say that Saddam lived another 5 years, well, Saddam just being in power for 5 years, he was already going to kill more Iraqis than the war killed. So, but Bush doesn't get credit for saving lives. People say, oh, Bush lied and people died. It's like, people don't understand that the alternative could be much worse, that it's not, oh, you killed 300,000 people. It's like, yeah, but, and if you didn't, 8 million might have died, for example. So,
and I'll say this too, everyone who voted to liberate Iraq, they knew what they were doing. They knew that his time was up. His time was over. Like, whether if you're like Hillary Clinton on this, or if you're Mitt Romney on this, they knew that he had to go. It was done.
Oh, yeah.
It was over. Negotiation is done.
No, you're right.
Tears.
The problem is with our generation right now, especially, but increasingly with like disenfranchised boomers and Gen Xers and stuff who want to be hip, and they start watching Jimmy Dore and stuff, neckbeard Jimmy Dore with his fedora. All these guys, what they would say, well, that's the problem, is that Hillary Clinton and Mitt Romney are basically the same party. They basically see them as like they're both neocons or whatever, and it's like there's a very there's a very troubling narrative out there that you want to be fringe. You want to be cringe. It doesn't matter what ideology you are. You can be an anarcho-fascist, communist, social democrat or whatever. The whole thing is just, well, screw the establishment. In other words, any of the politicians that actually care about national security and the expansion of Western interests, those people are bad. It's like, because it doesn't matter what ideology it is, far left, far right, it doesn't matter. They all agree America bad. The whole thing is just America bad. And so they would look at Hillary Clinton and Mitt Romney and say, oh, well, what's the difference between them? They both like war. It's like as if somehow people like war. Like, no, the pill is that the war happens whether you like it or not. It's just a matter of minimizing casualties by getting it over with sooner rather than letting them start it. So it's anyway, that's kind of like my rant there, but I'll let you continue there, Anthony. But
no, I think Suzuki wanted to say something.
Yeah, go Suzuki.
No, I was just agreeing with the point you're making about how we Hawks don't like war, but we understand the cost effectiveness of an early intervention versus waiting it out.
Yeah. I mean, people talk about preemptive war as if it's like the most horrible thing, like it's a war crime or whatever, to preemptive war. And it's like, in most cases, a preemptive war is going to save more lives than getting involved once things hit the breaking point, right? It's like, are we going to wait until North Korea has nukes? Oh, yeah, we're going to wait until North Korea has nukes. I guess a preemptive war would be bad. It's like, oh, they have 200 nukes? Let's not do anything. And then in 10, 15 years, oh, they have 1,800 nukes and they've just invaded the South. Well, it would be bad for us to intervene because we don't want to lose all of our cities. And by the way, at that point, it's too late. Like, even a hawkish president isn't going to fight that war. And guess what? I got news, dudes. The war happens either way because now North Korea is already at war with South Korea. So no matter what you do, there's going to be a war that happens and millions are going to die. The question is, do you do it before they get the nukes or after they get the nukes? And it turns out we just got a lot of procrastinators who they're not pilled, they're not skilled, they're meek, they're weak, they're feeble. They don't. I mean, I'm talking about Obama and Trump here for the most part. I mean, obviously Bush was busy dealing with the war on terror and Saddam Hussein. To his credit, I think he dropped the ball on North Korea, but I understand you can't do a 3-front war at that time. There wasn't too much that you could do about it. But Obama and Trump, they get no excuse, especially because Obama pulled out from one of those fronts. So,
yeah. Well, I think Obama's hands were kind of tied. I mean, of course, I still think he could have made an ultimate decision to intervene, but he didn't. But I do think his hands are kind of tied because he was suffering after the midterm elections in 2010. His popularity was declining, and unfortunately, interventionism isn't really a popular thing among the vocal voters. And I think that had he endorsed intervention, people would have accused him of, being basically another Bush or something, and would have, he would have lost re-election.
There was huge protests, I think in DC when Bush intervened into Libya. There was a bunch of cringe lords saying, Obama was a warmonger, and it's like, dude, this is like the best he's doing, buddy. Like this, like you think that's the lowest? I think that's like the peak of him, taking out Gaddafi. But he got a lot of flack for that from his own.
Yeah, and it wasn't even Obama that took out Gaddafi. It was a grassroots civilian revolution against Gaddafi. All we did was take out his air force and hinder his ability to fight back.
Right.
We didn't kill Gaddafi. That was the rebels. That was the Libyan people.
Right, but I mean, like most people that were protesting were against the intervention, like fundamentally.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that's one of the big downfalls with the democracy is that democracy is obviously the best system to live under, but it's also the most vulnerable to getting cucked like that, where anti-democratic enemies are able to take advantage and stoke isolationism and anti-interventionism here. And just briefly on that point about isolationism versus anti-interventionism, I know that a lot of these people say, well, no, we're not isolationists. Don't call me an isolationist. I want to trade with people. It's like, no, isolationism is mostly a foreign policy thing. They don't like being called isolationists because the OG isolationists were the America Firsters who said, why not peace with Hitler in the 30s? And they know that. So they know that isolationism is something that when people think of it, they think of, let's be friends with Hitler. They don't like it. So they'll use terms like non-interventionism because it sounds more neutral or whatever. And it's like, whenever you guys hear, especially if you're watching this, whenever you hear the phrase non-interventionism, I want you to think of those guys holding up the banners of let's be friends with Hitler, why not peace, bro? Like that, it's the same thing. It's the same thing. It's just a cute way of phrasing it, right? It's like it's isolationism. So
yeah, and also on earlier we talked about wars that would happen either way if we early intervene. I had a point I was going to make earlier. Hold on. Oh yeah, there's Kyle Kulinski has this favorite line of his. He says, "Oh well, this country isn't attacking us, so why are we attacking them?" Which is, it's like, dude, by the time they're attacking us, it is far too late. I would rather get to them and stop them from attacking us in the first place.
Yes. Absolutely. That's the thing with Kyle. And it's not just Kyle. A lot of people will say that. It's like, well, when did North Korea ever attack America? Or when did China ever attack America? It's like, yeah, they're gearing up, dude. It's like that's the thing. That's the pill in all of this. That's the pill. These people are nothing but virtue signaling SJWs. Like, I don't care if you're on the right or if you're on the left. It doesn't matter. If you're a Nick Fuentes fan, if you're a Vosh fan, it doesn't matter. If you make the argument, war bad, basically, is what they're trying to say here. All these sort of appeals to emotion. You're not pilled. You like that is fundamentally like it's an SJW sort of thing to do. It's entirely virtue signaling because here we sound like the bad guys. We sound like villains, but we're red pilled on this. We understand it. It's like, no, people are going to die. you want to minimize casualties and protect your interests as best as possible. So you accept that people are going to die, you do it over there, and then you keep your country safe. But nobody gives you credit for that, because guess what? If you keep your country safe, then people are free, they're happy, they can get fat and eat McDonald's and stuff, and then go on 4chan and talk about how you're a warmonger and a war criminal, because they have the freedom to do it. And whereas if we lost that and we let them come here, they wouldn't be able to complain about you on the internet, because the new leaders wouldn't allow the internet. But
wouldn't be an internet.
Nobody ever keeps that in context. I'm so sick of the anti-American filth. Like we tolerate it because we're a free and open society and stuff, but it's like, yeah, they're only able to say that stuff because this is a free and open society. Like, if this was a closed society, those people would be rounded up for sedition and shot for being treasonous and siding with Assad and Putin. So
they're demeaning they're demeaning the very country that fought for their right to demean them. They're hiding behind the very shield they criticize.
I'm not saying that they should be executed as traitors. I'm just saying that's what would happen if they pulled this shit in Russia or China, for example. So, but they do it here. It's like,
I know for one, I showed you guys earlier that Joe Biden video about bombing Belgrade.
Yeah,
and it's like the first comment under that was like, "What did the Serbians do?" Are you kidding me? What did the Serbians do?
I don't know. Maybe the genocide had something to do with it.
Serbia. I mean, okay, this is a little bit of a short tangent. I just want to say on this. There's a lot of people trying to, on the internet right now, on the left and the right, trying to make Serbia look like a victim here. Serbia is not a victim. Fuck Serbia. They perpetrated a genocide upon many nations in the 90s. And now they've got a hand sanitizer brigade going around on Twitter, trying to make it all look clean and polished and like they didn't do anything wrong. It's like, no, Serbia deserved to get, like, the problem with that war is that Bill Clinton didn't bomb them hard enough. That's my view, because they're unapologetic about it. So,
and what's funny,
the final
too,
state.
I was just gonna say, what's funny too about that video, that it's like, you think that's the gotcha for voting for him? No, dude, that's like the selling point. That's the selling point, dude, for defending freedom. That's not a negative. That's a good trait.
Oh, it's not even freedom. That's the other thing, is it's like, it's not even like freedom and ideas and stuff per se. It's like it's literally just your life. I mean, because it wasn't even an ideological thing necessarily in and of itself. It was, oh, we're going to go and kill the Bosniaks. Like, we're just going to execute people. I mean, it's the sort of thing that, like, it transcends ideology at that point. It's not about capitalism versus communism, this or that. It's about life and death, like life versus death. The forces of death versus the forces of life. Like, America was on the force of life. I mean, that was so obvious. It's so obvious, because look at the alternative in Rwanda, where nobody decided to stand with the side of life. Well, what happened? 1 million died. Yeah. Well, no shit, because people chose death over life and said, "Oh, that would be difficult." By the way, that would not have been a difficult intervention to prosecute. It would have been way easier than Serbia, because Serbia was allied with Russia. Like, there's actual risks there, right? But with Rwanda, they didn't have some big superpower blackmailing us. So
no, I mean they had like an army of maybe 30,000 people.
Oh yeah,
and most of those were regulars. They didn't have like guns. A lot of them used machetes. Mm-hmm. So we could have. I doubt we would have even suffered. I doubt we would have even suffered one dead. Had we intervened there. In fact, we actually did intervene there briefly, but only to evacuate our own people. And when we went in there to evacuate our own people, the killings stopped for about a full day. And then once we left, the killing started again. Had we just stayed, like not even fought, had we just stayed there, we could have saved tens of thousands of lives.
Oh yeah, and it's so disingenuous too, because you often see a lot of these people who they'll cite things like their Catholicism and whatnot for opposing the wars, and yet at least the ones who claim to be more morally virtuous and stuff. I'm not talking about Knicks fans; they don't give to charity. But some of those people who claim to be against the wars and stuff and say it's not our place to interfere, they give money to charity to nominally, I guess, help people over in Africa, but then they oppose something that would have saved 1 million lives. It's like, I got news, dudes. Intervening in Rwanda would have saved way more lives than anybody giving like $20 a month to like some Christian charity working over there. So,
right, yeah, and the ramifications of Rwanda are still being felt today. There's the Congo wars. That was a result of the genocide, because the war in Rwanda didn't so much end as it was pushed over the border.
Right,
and it's still going on today.
No, you're right. You're right. That's the deadliest conflict since the end of World War II. Is the conflict in the DR Congo, and that's been that like what? It's closer to 10 million people now that have died in that conflict, and nobody ever talks about it. Nobody ever talks about it. So,
right. Well, the thing is too, right? Like when it comes to even in 2008, I mean, I understand George Bush's hands were tied, but like the Georgians were really, defending really a lot against the Russians, and it's like we really didn't come in to help. It's it's one of those things where it's like I understand that like Bush was in 2 wars, but it's like, hey, there's people over here defending against their life against the Russians. It's like I don't know, like I just feel like we could have intervened more, like in Rwanda. I don't know, try to help some of the Central Asian states against Russia, and it's like, man, it's such a mistake though that people are so naive. It's like, yeah, let's give up all of our nukes to Putin and he won't do anything. Yeah, that worked out really well, did it?
No, it's so naive. Again, it goes back to this whole thing. Like these people will accuse us of like virtue signaling or whatever, and it's like, no, these people are virtue signaling. What they don't understand is that when you talk about, well, we're bad and you just want to murder people and you would just want to the oil or whatever, they're basically reciting like Michael Moore lines. They're reciting like Kremlin Kyle lines to basically let other people in the room know, oh, I'm virtuous. I'm against war. You should sleep with me. That's basically what they're doing, right? Like because they're trying to get laid. Because I mean, obviously these people who buy into this are pretty dorky to begin with, and so they're like, well, you gotta get laid somehow. I know. I'll show the girls that I'm against war, and it's like, I mean, there's a serious problem here when they then have the nerve to call us, what's the I know they'll call us like idealists, or they'll say, well, you guys don't understand, you guys try to do the right thing and people get hurt. It's like, no, people are going to get hurt whether you get your way or we get our way. The only difference is if we get our way, maybe 600,000 people get hurt in that particular conflict. If you get your way, it spills over to the point that perhaps millions, or in the case of World War II, literally tens of millions, almost 100 million people, because we decided to wait a few years. It's like a few years is worth the difference between 3 million and 90 million. Really?
And like, here's the thing too, that's actually kind of ironic. Like a lot of people on the left, they'll always say like, oh my God, that guy's a fascist, or whatever. And it's like, wait a second, dude. If you're actually against fascism, why aren't you against fascist Russia? Why aren't you against China?
Yes.
Why aren't you against Hungary? It's like, if you hate fascism so much, you should be willing to go to war with it.
Oh, but they're anti-imperialists, bro. They're fighting American capitalism, bro. They're our allies, bro. That's what these dorks would say, right? I mean, I went to school with people like this. I went to school with like a bunch of lefties who think that I'm a fascist because I'm a neocon. Like, these people are delusional, dude.
You know what they remind me of? These anti-interventionists. They remind me of, like those ditzy beauty pageant contestants. Like they'll ask me, like, what's your goal for the world? And be like, I want to stop war. I want fighting to stop. Like stupid shit like that. That's what they remind me of.
You're so right. You're so right. Obviously, I was trying to keep this to be a bit more of a serious stream. I didn't have any memes or anything prepared for tonight. But for one of the more lighthearted streams, I'm going to have one of those short speeches prepared so that every time we watch somebody like Nick Fuentes, or we watch Vosh, or we watch Kyle Kulinski, or we watch Jimmy Dore, or we watch Abby Martin, or we watch Noam Chomsky, or we watch Ron Paul, or Jesse Ventura, or Bernie Sanders, or any of these guys talk about how, well, actually, or Tulsi Gabbard, I just want to end the wars. You know, neolibs, neocons bad, basically. I'm just going to show one of those ditzy bimbo beauty pageants talk about, well, yeah, I guess if I win like Miss America, I just want to end the wars. It's like, what? Like, you're right. That's the meme. They do the meme. They do the beauty pageant meme. Like, it's, you know, I call it virtue signaling, because that's like the big term that's kind of like the meme and everything. Everybody knows from like the SJWs versus the anti-SJWs, like virtue signaling became like a really big thing. But honestly, some virtue signaling arguments are pretty complex. There's some thought that goes into them. This is almost like it's a next level of virtue signaling. It's just so dumb and so feeble and so weak and so meek that it's so brainletty that it makes regular SJW type virtue signaling look like a really well thought out, well researched thesis or something. Like, that's how much of a brainless argument that is. It's like, war bad. It's like, yeah, dipshit, war bad. Yeah, you think we like war? We're just pilled on the reality that war isn't a choice. It's just a matter of when and on whose terms.
Right, exactly. It's like, here's the thing, right? It's either you fight over there or you're fighting them here. That's the option. What would you rather do?
I mean, but you see, that's the thing. They would say that that's a false dichotomy. That's a problematic way of phrasing it, because you're just feeding into the line that the military-industrial complex wants you to parrot. They really think that there's... See, that's the thing. Some of these people know what they're doing. Some of these people know what they're doing. Like the smart ones, the leaders know what they're doing. Most of these people genuinely are just mistaken, and they really think that you can choose between peace and war. And I get why peace looks better then, right? That makes all the sense in the world. But that goes back to what I was talking about with Suzuki. Is it's like, yeah, but the road to hell is paved with good intentions. All those people who opposed intervention in Rwanda thought that they were sticking it to the establishment or whatever and making the world a better place by not getting involved in another war. And guess what happened? Instead of a few thousand people dying, 1 million people died. So they should be proud. They should be proud. And they'll never have that pointed out to them. They'll never realize it, because let's keep it real. They live in echo chambers. None of them watch this show. None of them watch Bill Kristol. None of them listen to like David Frum. None of them get it. None of them, they all go between like TYT and then Secular Talk and then the Jimmy Dore show and then Michael Brooks. And for some of them, though, not all of them are like that. Some of them will fancy themselves to be intellectuals who consider both sides. So they'll go and watch Dave Rubin talk about how war bad, and they'll watch Nick Fuentes talk about war bad. And it's like, okay, you watch right-wing and left-wing sources, and both the right-wing and left-wing sources, you agree, hate America, and they both have the exact same foreign policy. Guess what? You didn't watch a diverse array of opinions. You got the same opinions, just from different grifters. Like, it's not impressive. So,
well, I think the other thing too to really consider as well is that's like, if you do something earlier, right, you have to waste less resources. Where it's like in World War II, we had millions and millions of people that we had to conscript and train and all that. Like, think of all the resources we have to spend. Think of all the tax money, all the rations, like just everything we had to sacrifice. And it's like, yeah, I'd rather take out Saddam now than Saddam taking over the Middle East. Like, yeah, of course.
Exactly.
Like, that's the thing. Like,
exactly.
That's the thing. Like, I'm gonna go in with 200,000 soldiers. I don't want to go in with 2 million soldiers, because guess what? We're gonna stop it now. We're gonna end the cringe today. Like, it's over. Like, there's no negotiations.
Like, imagine that Hitler was taken out in 1936 or 1937. How many people do we think would have died in that? Germany wasn't as industrialized, nowhere near the same preparedness in place. They would have been caught off guard. At most, 3 million people would have died in that war, and almost all of them would have been on the German side. Whereas we're like, oh, we want peace for a few years. Let's trade 90 million plus extra deaths for, well, I mean, in fairness, that's the world death toll. In Europe, it was closer to about 50 million. So let's trade 47 million extra deaths for a few years of let's keep it real, false peace. Because was it fun to be alive back then? Everybody knew what was coming. Like, unless you were some delusional pigeon who really believed Neville Chamberlain, most people knew that things were about to get really bad. And it was a bad time to be alive. And really, that's the kind of peace you want, is to constantly be living with the enemy holding this sword of Damocles over your head, saying, if you displease me at any time, I can come in and take your territory and enslave you and murder all the men in your community.
And
really,
here's the
that's
thing.
peace? That's peace? Is it peaceful to have Russia pointing 10, or I should say 8,000 nukes at us right now? Is this peaceful? No, it's not. If we want real peace, we got to take these regimes out. So,
Oh, and here's the
Exactly.
other thing too. Just before we go real quick, I just wanted to say, when it comes to Neville Chamberlain, he knew that his time was coming up, and Churchill knew that there was only one solution to the Nazi and fascist regimes. He knew that there was only one way to deal with this, because guess what? The Nazi regime, they took the war from the Rhineland all the way to the London streets. They were bombing London. They were destroying everything, and it's like, yeah, that's what happens. Right? Like the British, yeah, they knew, because they were fighting on their own territory. I mean, look at the battle for Britain. They were fighting literally on their own territory. So, like, when these people say, like, oh, it's anti-imperialist, like, that's bullshit. I mean, the British were fighting for their own skies against the fascists. I mean, like, these people are insane.
oh, absolutely. And the thing is, it sucks about what happened in World War II, but at least the one good thing that could have come from that is that we could have learned something. But we didn't learn jack, because we're just letting it all happen all over again. We have the same filth shits walking around our society, talking about how Assad is our friend and how Putin is our friend, just as those guys back then talked about how Hitler is our friend. It's like they want us to wait and wait and wait until Eurasia's completely occupied. And then what are we supposed to do? Like, I mean, these people are not on our side. That's why I call them fifth columns. I mean, these people, at the end of the day, they don't have our interests at heart. We should view them fundamentally as parasites on our society. If you're somebody who, granted, not all of them are malicious. That's part of the problem, is that most of these people don't know what they're doing. Most of these people really think that it's a choice between war and peace, and we look like we're the warmongers, when in reality our enemies are the warmongers. Like Putin's going to get a war, Xi Jinping's going to get a war, Kim's going to get a war. It's just a matter of when they decide to start it. It's like, it goes back to nipping it in the bud. And in that scenario, where say FDR and Churchill went in and proactively took out Hitler in 1930, let's say 1937, and 3 million people died, imagine how many people would have said, how dare you, what an imperialist, you went into an independent sovereign country and you got millions of people killed, you're horrible. And they would have no knowledge that they got their butts saved from living in our timeline, where instead of 3 million people dying in World War II in Europe, over 50 million people died in World War II in Europe. And I should clarify the numbers there, because of course about 40 million died in Asia due to the Japanese fascists. But
one of my favorite retorts is like when people like Paul Joseph Watson, they say that like we bombed Dresden or whatever. Like, it's like, Paul Joseph Watson, like, shut up, dude. Like, you would have been killed with the Nazis too, buddy. So don't even like try to defend them. Like, these people are abhorrent, honestly.
It's such a disgrace. What I'm going to have to do at some point, I know Kraut's done a video on this. I'm going to have to do a video on how in total war, there's no such thing as civilians. Like, I got news. Those people in that city were producing things that assisted the German war effort. Oh, I know that sounds bad. That sounds bad. It's like, how can you target civilians? No, there's no such thing as a civilian in war. I mean, look at Hiroshima and Nagasaki. They had military depots. They were producing material for the Japanese forces. Sure, they weren't active duty troops, But this is total war. Total war. Guess what?
But-
If they had the opportunity to drop the nukes on New York and Philadelphia instead, do you think that the emperor would have said, well, those aren't military bases, so I'm not going to do it? No, they would nuke us the second if they had the opportunity. Like, total war is where you go all in. It wasn't a partial war. It wasn't a tit for tat situation. It was a battle to the death. And you don't know who's going to win, so you have to do everything in your power to demoralize the enemy. So that's my view. So
Also, even even if you were to call Dresden a war crime, and it's still controversial today.
it's not a war crime. Yeah.
Well, yeah, like I have mixed feelings about that because I had family members who were caught up in the bombing of Germany. Even if we were to call this a war crime, and I think it kind of blurs the line, that doesn't discredit the war in general. It's like, yes, thousands of people died in Dresden. Do you know how many people the Nazis killed? And it's a false equivalency. It's like, do you realize the circumstances that led to that bombing? Do you think we just bombed them for no reason? It's like, no, it was war, and the war was started by them.
Yes. It should be noted there. It should be noted there that originally the British forces, the Air Force in Britain, was only targeting German military installations. But then Hitler decided to target British cities. So they were like, well, if you're going to do that, we're going to bomb the crap out of your civilian centers too. Like, Hitler started that. Like, I mean, I know that this sounds kind of like a Machiavellian sort of thing, but it's like, if you don't want your city to get firebombed, maybe you should overthrow the dictator that's in power. I mean, because people do have agency at the end of the day. And it's the same thing with sanctions. I don't like sanctions. I think that they hurt the most innocent first and the regime last. But part of the point of sanctions is to make life very hard for the people on the ground so that they rise up and overthrow the leader. So this is a lesson to all the people out there, if you're in one of those sorts of regimes and you're thinking, well, the leader will kill me or whatever if I try to do anything, get a critical mass of people together, get rid of him, because guess what? The leader's going to get you killed anyway because your town's going to get firebombed. So you might as well just do it on your own because death is coming either way. So
I think one reason why I can justify the the nuclear weapons used in Japan was like there were some civilians that were in Japan that were producing, weapons and stuff like that and manufacturing stuff like that. It's like, okay, yes, not all civilians were, but there definitely was huge military complexes in Japan where we dropped the bomb. And it's like, yeah, like there were civilians. There were tens of thousands of civilians. Like, okay, yeah, they're like every single one though, but there were definitely enough of them that were supporting the regime, like directly though, by producing these weapons, by training people, by doing all this kind of other management stuff. And it's like, yeah, you guys are just as guilty, and it's like, yeah, you guys were part of the fascist Japanese empire. So
yeah. See, that's what happens. That's the lesson in all of this, is that it should be a message that's loud and clear to people that are in these regimes. As much as it sucks, it's like, if you don't do anything and you don't rise up, you might be a victim of collateral damage when our forces liberate you. I mean, that's just the reality on the ground. It's like, you're worried that the leader might kill you. Okay, well, no matter what, you might die anyway. I'm sure if those people that died in Dresden had, if everybody just respawned and were given another opportunity, they would have collectively rose up and resisted the SS and everything in their town, but and kicked out the Nazi forces. I understand that individuals can feel powerless. That's part of why it's so important to prevent somebody like Hitler from coming into power in the first place, to do everything to stop him, because he used the Constitution, he used the democratic process to get into that position where he could take it all away. And nobody ever stopped him, because they started off with, well, oh, he's going to make Germany great again or whatever. And then it's like, oh, he's going to do that. Well, if I do anything, then he's going to hurt me. And it's like, yeah, but a lot of those people that thought that were eventually hurt in the liberation process anyway. So you might as well just bite the bullet and at least try to make things better. I mean, it sucks, but it's like this goes to the people in Iran, for example. It's like the sanctions aren't just there to hurt the regime. They're mostly there on purpose to hurt the people so that they rise up and get rid of the leader. It's like, because there will be sanctions relief if you get rid of the leader. Now, granted, it rarely ever works because it's a really hard thing to overthrow a dictator. But I'm just so sick of the war crimes. Oh, it's a war crime or whatever. That term is almost meaningless at this point. Anybody that people don't like gets called a war criminal. I mean, I've been called a war criminal on Twitter before. Like, what? It's like,
it's.
I mean, Arthur and I were literally both called war criminals because we supported taking out Saddam. It's like, really? So supporting taking out a dictator is a war crime now?
Well,
That's
the other
war
thing that it's like, I mean, just look at the Persian Gulf War in 1991. I mean, look at all the negotiations that George H. Bush did. He did everything for Saddam. He tried to do all this diplomatic stuff for Saddam Hussein. Yeah. He tried to give the flowers. He tried to give like chocolate cake and everything. And
yeah, he went out of his way.
Saddam refused to leave Kuwait. Yep. Even if you negotiate with these people, they still refuse. And you're just buying time. And George H. Bush knew that, like, okay, this is not working. We're not going to give him flowers. We're not going to give him chocolate cake. We're actually going to go into Kuwait because this is getting useless. These negotiations don't work. And like, that's what normally happens because they don't care. They're already set because Saddam thinks that he's the good guy. So how can you like negotiate with these people? He thinks he's like the great leader.
But Anthony, Milsrow said that Hitler and Saddam and stuff, they thought they were the bad guys. He literally said that. I mean, I know that's like kind of a meme at this point. He really does think that Hitler thought that he was the bad guy. Like, imagine being so much of a brainlet that you think that Hitler thought he was evil. Like, what? Obviously, Hitler thought he was the hero in his story. That's so obvious. Like, I mean, that's not a controversial thing to say that Hitler thought that he was making the world a better place. His version of a better place was disgusting, but he thought he was the good guy. He thought the Americans were the bad guys. So. Oh, man. You know, we are at the hour mark here. And I am pretty tired tonight. This was obviously a bit of a different sort of tone to a stream than usual. We can go a little bit longer, but if anybody else has any sort of thoughts, but soon we're going to have to go to final remarks, though. It's the only thing.
I think I covered everything I wanted to talk about, but yeah.
Because I got through everything. Arthur, was there anything that you wanted to add or anything that, you know?
No, not really.
Not really, yeah. Anthony, is there anything else that you wanted to add?
Hawk it up.
Yeah. Well, we'll go to final remarks then. We'll end the stream now. I'll be back here at 9 p.m. Pacific tomorrow. Be a bit of a different stream. But we'll just go, you know, anybody can say, you know, whatever's on their mind, basically, with respect to this kind of stuff, what we've been talking about, and the Hawk bill, all that sort of stuff. So we'll start with Suzuki.
Well, I think today, on May 8th, you know, 75 years after the war in Europe ended, I think everyone should think back to what we said after the Holocaust, never again. Because when we said that, we meant it. We saw the horrors that have been perpetrated, the utter crimes against humanity that have been perpetrated by the Nazis against innocent people, and we said never again. And when we say that, it means that we're supposed to stand up collectively when we see such evil happening again. Not just when it affects us, not even just when it affects our allies. When it affects anybody, we have to stand up. And unfortunately, I don't believe we have a very good track record of doing that. And that is something I hope will one day change. I hope someday we will learn to look beyond nationality and beyond such petty differences and come together and see each other as humans. and stand up for one another when humanity is threatened. Because when stuff like Rwanda happens, that's like the genocide in Rwanda or in Bosnia or in Cambodia. That's not just an attack against the people being killed; it's an attack on humanity itself. And
Yeah.
it's incumbent upon all of us to stand up and stop that wherever and whenever it emerges. And there's no excuse for ignoring that. And to all the non-interventionists and the isolationists who look at the situation in Syria, see the war crimes being committed there, and then have the gall to say that it's not our problem, that we shouldn't intervene. Those people are prophets of doom. They are hairbringers of inhumanity, and they are immoral. They are wrong, and I hope one day they will be cast into the wastebasket of history, because that's where they belong.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. Thanks for coming on, Suzuki. And definitely, have a good night. We're going to go to Arthur now for your closing remarks. Anything that you want to add?
Suzuki said it best. So I don't want to stutter and ruin what he said. So, and I like that I got destroyed in the chat. I called out by Mitzi. Big up Mitzi.
Oh man. Yeah, no, I mean, we did have a bit of an active chat. Not too many people here tonight. I guess, a lot of people probably looked at this video and said, that's kind of doomy. I don't really want to think about that kind of stuff because, it's kind of a dark subject, right? But we need to be aware of these kinds of things and come to terms with the dark side of what it means to be alive, but also to recognize that we're privileged enough to live in a world where a part of the world at least where it's our responsibility to champion the values of those who were born in less fortunate places like North Korea. So we'll go to Anthony then for your closing remarks.
I'll say I think from everything tonight, whether it be Nazi Germany or Japan or Russia or Saddam Hussein or Cambodia or Rwanda or or any other part of the world, it's always important that you can't negotiate. Negotiating is done when these people commit war crimes. Like, it's already done. You're like, the thought process of these people has already gone beyond comprehension, and it's important that it's yes, it's war is terrible, but at the same time, what is the solution? Because there's only one solution to solving these kind of problems, and in the long run, in a lot of ways, we save more lives by acting and by doing this. So, as always, thank you for having me on this platform, Kevin, to speak.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yep, no problem. Definitely good to get everybody's perspective here. We're just going to go to my closing remarks here, and then we'll close out the stream. Thank you for everybody for being with us tonight.
Thanks.
Just when it comes to this subject of of war and the lessons from World War II, I don't really have too much else to add on what we've said tonight. I just want to make it very clear. 75 years ago was the conclusion of the war in Europe. That's not that long. There are a lot of people that are alive right now that were still alive when the war was going on or before the war even started. And so it could happen again. A lot of the similar things that happened in the run-up to World War II are happening right now. And in a way, at least in the run-up to World War II, most people still understood that, America and Britain were the good guys, and it was a fringe minority of people who said, why not peace with Hitler? The problem is today, it seems like we're in a reverse position. It feels like we're in an uphill battle. We're in the minority for saying that the West is the best and that, human rights are good and should be a global sort of thing. And now it's hip and cool and edgy to be, any number of different ideologies that oppose intervention. But at the end of the day, there will be intervention whether you want it or not. The only question is who's going to be doing the intervening. Will it be us to save the world, or will it be our enemies to wipe us out? And so there is no choice between war and peace. There's only a choice between early and less painful war or later and more painful war. So that's the pill right there. And yeah, it's hard to swallow, but that's reality as it is, and we have to deal with it. And if you want to stick your head in the sand and you want to say, you know, that's I can't bear that, I'm too meek and weak for that, that's fine. Don't get involved in politics. Don't get involved in politics. Just be apolitical. That's cool. That's cool. If you can't handle that pill, don't be voting. Don't get on Twitter. Don't have a political presence in any way or any form, because you can't handle it. You're simply ill prepared. You do not have the fortitude for to take politics seriously, and you're doing the service to the world by virtue signaling to hinder our efforts to bring about real peace, real prosperity, true peace, not this false peace of living in fear, real lasting peace for everybody on earth. And so with that, thank you for being with us, and have a good night, everybody. I'll be back here tomorrow at 9 p.m. Eastern, 9 p.m. Pacific, 12 a.m. Eastern. Peace.
Peace.